Hello everyone and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Ridge stood in the dim lighting of the Forrester living room, the fireplace crackling as if mocking him. The air reeked of old money and old betrayals, the same scent that had clung to these walls since he was a child, watching his father choose between women the way other men chose ties. He gripped the glass of scotch so tightly that the crystal threatened to shatter in his palm. 5 words. That was all it took to unravel everything. You still love her, Deacon. He didn't shout it. He did not need to. The words sank between them like stones into still water, rippling outward until they reached every corner of the room, every memory, and every ghost of Taylor who still walked these halls in her bare feet and white coat. Deacon did not flinch. He had been looking forward to this moment for months, if not years. Ridge's jaw tightened every time Taylor's name came up in conversation. His eyes followed her across rooms, as if she were the only light in an otherwise dark world. Deacon had seen it all before, on himself, in mirrors, and at the bottom of bottles. Yeah, Deacon responded quietly, meeting Ridge's gaze without apology. I never stopped. Ridge's 4 words back were more devastating than any punch he could have delivered. They were honest. Raw. The kind of truth that this family had spent decades concealing beneath couture contracts and carefully crafted lies. Ridge laughed, but it ended up broken. After all, following release from prison, after Sheila, after you said you were done chasing ghosts. She isn't a ghost, Ridge. She's the only real thing I've ever had. The fire erupted, sending sparks up the chimney like tiny screams. Ridge turned away, staring at his mother's portrait above the mantel. Stephanie Forrester is eternally judging through oil and canvas. She had despised Deacon from the moment she laid eyes on him. Stephanie called him trash in the most refined way she could, and now he was standing in her house, claiming her daughter-in-law's heart as if it was his to keep. Do you think you're better for her now? Ridge asked, his voice dangerously calm. Because you've been sober for several years? Because you play house with hope and pretend to be redeemed? Deacon's hands clenched at his sides. I am not pretending anything. I know who I am. The question is, do you know who Taylor needs? The name hovered between them like smoke. Taylor. Taylor was beautiful and broken, having spent her life trying to fix everyone else, while her own heart had shattered into pieces too small to glue back together. Taylor had loved Ridge despite miscarriages, shootings, and comas. Taylor had raised his children while Brooke was off playing musical marriages. Taylor had died, actually died, and returned to find that the world had moved on without her. Ridge's knuckles turned white around the glass. She needs stability. She needs someone who doesn't ruin everything he touches. Like you did. Deacon's voice was soft and almost gentle. How many times have you left her, Ridge? How many times have you chosen Brooke over her, your children, and everything else that matters? I was there, remember? I watched her cry herself to sleep in that dingy apartment after you married Brooke for the 1000th time. Don't you dare, I dare, Deacon interrupted. Because someone needs to say it. Taylor is kept on a shelf like a trophy, which you remove when Brooke becomes boring. You use her goodness to clean up your messes, then push her back into the dark when the thrill wears off. Ridge spun around, his eyes blazing. Do you think you're different? Do you think you wouldn't do the same thing if a waitress at Il Giardino smiled at you? Deacon took a step forward. Maybe. Perhaps I'm still a screw-up. But I would never make her feel like a second choice. Never again. Suddenly, the room felt too small. Too full of the things they didn't say. Outside, the Pacific Coast Highway hummed with Saturday night traffic, people going places, and living lives other than those centered on who loved whom in the Forrester orbit. Inside, 2 men stood across from each other, their 20-year history crackling like static electricity. You're not good enough for her, Ridge admitted finally. You never were. Deacon smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Perhaps not, but neither are you. He walked past Ridge and toward the door, pausing only to add over his shoulder. She deserves someone who puts her first. Every day. Without hesitation. Ridge, if that's not you anymore, let her go. The door softly closed behind him. No slamming. There's no drama. Just the quiet finality of a man who had finally spoken his mind. Ridge stood alone in the cavernous room, staring at the space Deacon had occupied just moments before. The scotch tasted like ash in his mouth. He imagined Taylor upstairs, reading in that oversized chair by the window, her hair pulled back into that messy bun she wore when no one was looking. He remembered the small but genuine smile she gave Deacon at the hospital benefit last week. Ridge hadn't seen this kind of smile from her in months. He reflected on all the times he had promised her eternal life but only delivered temporary results. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Brooke texted, "Dinner at home tonight? I miss you." He stared at the screen until it went black. Taylor rubbed her eyes after closing her book upstairs. The house was too quiet tonight. She'd heard voices earlier. Ridge and Deacon were arguing about something. She had not eavesdropped. She'd learned long ago that knowing the details was rarely useful. She padded barefoot to the balcony, wrapping her arms around herself against the cool November breeze. Deacon's taillights disappeared down the drive. She watched them leave with an unsettling sense of longing. Her phone lit up on the nightstand. A message from an unknown number. "You deserve to be the first choice. Always." She deleted it before she had time to overthink it. But she did not block the number. In the guest room down the hall, Steffi listened to her father pace. She'd returned home early from Paris, sensing the storm approaching. Her parents' marriage had always been precarious, teetering on the brink of collapse. She had spent years trying to keep it together with tape, prayers, and sheer willpower. She wasn't sure she wanted to anymore. She texted Thomas, "Dad knows about Deacon and Mom. It is bad." Thomas responded immediately, saying, "On my way." Hope poured a glass of wine for herself in the kitchen, her hand shaking. Her father's confession had been coming for weeks. She'd noticed how he looked at Taylor during family dinners, as if she were the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. She should have been angry, should have felt betrayed. Instead, she felt relieved. Perhaps her father had finally found something worthwhile to fight for other than destruction. Brooke arrived 20 minutes later, sweeping in as if she owned the place, which, in many ways, she did. She discovered Ridge in the living room, staring into the fire as if it held answers. "Was it a rough night?" she inquired, sliding her arms around his waist from behind. He did not pull away, nor did he lean in. "Deacon's in love with Taylor," he stated flatly. Brooke became very still. Again, still. She turned him to face her, looking into his eyes. "And you? Where does this leave you?" Ridge looked at her, the woman who had been his addiction for 30 years. Mother of his children. He kept returning to the chaos, drawn to it like a moth to flame. "I don't know," he admitted. Brooke's expression hardened. "Well, when you figure it out, let me know." She walked away without saying anything else. The front door shut with the finality of a gunshot. Taylor was upstairs when she heard it. Heard everything. She sat on the edge of their bed, staring at the empty space beside her. Ridge's sleep indent was long gone. Had been for months. She thought about Morocco. About the night she nearly died in Ridge's arms. About how he had promised her that things would be different. That they would eventually get it right. Promises. This family used them in the same way that cars use gasoline. Pretty words that got you nowhere when your tank ran empty. Her phone vibrated again. This time it's a call. Deacon's name appeared on the screen. She let it ring 4 times before answering. "I meant what I said," he told her without explanation. "Every word." "I know," she said softly. "Come meet me. Just to talk. Please." She closed her eyes. Ridge's expression when he returned home from Brooke's last week, smelling of her perfume. I noticed how he had been looking through her lately, as if she were furniture. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she announced. She hung up before she could reconsider her decision. Ridge dragged himself upstairs and discovered that the bed was empty. The balcony doors were open, and the curtains fluttered in the breeze. Taylor's robe lay on the chair like a shed skin. The moonlight glinted off her wedding rings on the nightstand. He picked them up and felt the weight in his palm. Cold. Final. Steffi stood in her doorway, looking down the hall at him. She said nothing. She simply looked at her father with eyes that had seen too much. I lost her, Ridge explained to the empty room. Steffi's voice was soft. No, father. You let her go. There is a difference. He sank onto the bed, head in his hands. The ring sliced through his palm like tiny accusations. Taylor drove with the windows down, allowing the wind to whip her hair into knots. She did not cry. Not yet. The tears would come later, once the numbness had worn off. Deacon waited for her at the beach near Paradise Cove. He stood barefoot in the sand, his jeans rolled up, looking exactly like the man she had fallen for in a hospital corridor all those years ago. She walked slowly toward him, each step feeling like she was crossing a threshold she'd never be able to overcome. When she approached him, he did not attempt to touch her. Just looked at her with those eyes that had seen so much. I'm not asking you to leave him, he explained quietly. I'm just asking you to choose yourself for once. Taylor looked out at the ocean, which was black and endless under the moonlight. Morocco was located somewhere out there. It was death. It was rebirth. I already did, she replied. Deacon's hand discovered hers in the darkness. She let him hold it. Behind them, the tide washed away footprints as quickly as they were made. Ridge sat alone in the Forrester mansion, clutching 2 rings and a lifetime's worth of regret. The house had never felt this empty. He considered calling Brooke, about begging Taylor to return home. He reflected on all the ways he had let the women he loved down. Instead, he opened the safe in his study and took out the divorce papers he had drawn up 6 months earlier. After the final fight, he realized that grand gestures and Forrester magic couldn't fix everything. He signed them with a pen that was more expensive than the average person's rent. Then he walked to Taylor's office, her real office, at the hospital where she'd pieced her life back together, and left them on her desk with a note. I'm sorry I couldn't meet your needs. Be happy. You deserve it more than anybody I know. He didn't sign it, love. Some truths were too harsh for that. Steffi discovered him at dawn, sitting on the terrace, watching the sun rise over the city that had eaten their family alive. It's over, he said, as she sat beside him. I know. That was the end of their conversation. I just watched the light spread across Los Angeles, gilding everything it touched. Taylor did not come home that night. Or the next. A week later, she moved into a small Malibu house with sea-facing windows. Deacon helped her carry the boxes, but he did not stay. Not yet. Certain things took time. Ridge only saw them together once, and it was at the grocery store. Taylor was laughing at something Deacon said as he loaded watermelons into her cart like a regular person. Like a man who wasn't carrying the burden of 3 decades of drama on his shoulders. She appeared lighter, younger. She felt like the woman she was before this family sucked her in. Ridge stood in the cereal aisle, holding a box of Frosted Flakes he didn't want, and watched as they left together. He did not follow. Some losses you just had to deal with. Months later, at Hope's wedding to a nice doctor who had never heard of the Forresters, Ridge stood up to toast. He looked out into the crowd, Brooke on one side, Taylor on the other, and Deacon standing behind her, his hand on the small of her back, as if it belonged there. He raised his glass. To second chances, he explained, and knowing when to let go. Taylor looked across the room. For the first time in years, there was no anger present. No resentment. Just peace. She smiled at him. A real one. Ridge smiled back. Later, as the music began and couples took to the floor, he watched Deacon spin Taylor around as if she were the only woman in the world. Ridge hadn't heard a laugh like hers in decades. He slipped away early. We drove to the beach, where it all ended. The sand felt cold under his bare feet. The waves crashed, retreated, and crashed again. He removed his wedding ring, which he'd worn through 3 marriages to 2 women, and threw it as far as he could into the dark water. It vanished without a sound. There were footsteps in the sand behind him. Steffi sat down next to him, linking her arm through his. Are you okay? She asked. He thought about it. Really thought about it. Yeah, he replied finally. I think I am. They stood together, watching the moon on the water, until the tide came in and washed away every trace of their presence. Taylor and Deacon walked together along the shoreline, their shadows merging into one. Some stories do not conclude with weddings and happily ever afters. Some conclude with letting go. With 5 angry words, everyone is finally set free. Ridge watched them until they were mere specks in the vastness of the sea. Then he turned and walked back toward the light, leaving the darkness behind him forever. The ocean preserved their secrets. It always has. Ridge Forrester stood in front of his father's mansion's large window, staring out at the Los Angeles skyline as the sun set. The colors of dusk painted the sky with streaks of amber and violet, but he barely noticed them. His mind was filled with emotions such as confusion, anger, betrayal, and disbelief. He had just learned something he never expected to hear, and it had come from the most unexpected person. Deacon Sharp. Ridge had walked into Il Giardino, Deacon's Italian restaurant, just hours before, intending to relax with a drink after another hectic day at Forrester Creations. He didn't expect to overhear Deacon speak about Taylor Hayes, his tailor, with such tenderness and passion that Ridge's stomach turned. He had not intended to eavesdrop. He had only heard his ex-wife's name when he passed by, and curiosity had kept him in place. What about the words that followed? They were impossible not to hear. Deacon had been telling a co-worker that he had fallen for Taylor, that he admired her and that she inspired him to be a better man. When Ridge heard Deacon say, "I think she deserves someone who truly sees her," it felt like a punch in the gut. Ridge couldn't stop thinking about it even hours later. He paced the length of the living room, every muscle contracted, his jaw clenching and unclenching as he repeated those words. He wasn't sure if he should be angry at Deacon, himself, or Taylor for getting caught up in this mess again. Ridge's hands tightened into fists as he heard the knock on the door. He recognized himself. He had texted Deacon only 2 words, "Come now." Deacon approached cautiously, his usual swagger muted. Before speaking, his dark eyes searched Ridge's face, as if trying to gauge the room's temperature. "You want to see me?" he asked. Ridge turned slowly, his expression stone-like. "Yeah," he replied. His voice was low, rough, and restrained. "We need to talk." Deacon shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the elegant room. "Look, if this is about Hope or Brooke, I really don't think." "This isn't about Brooke," Ridge abruptly cut him off. "This is about Taylor." Her name hung in the air like electricity. Deacon froze for a moment, and Ridge noticed a flicker of guilt in his eyes. That was all the confirmation he required. Ridge stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Do you have something you want to tell me?" Deacon exhaled slowly. "If you already know, I'm not sure what there is to say." "You could start by telling me why," Ridge said, his tone hardening. "Why her, Deacon? Why Taylor?" Deacon laughed without humor. "Why not? She's intelligent, kind, and compassionate. She is not caught up in the ego games that everyone else appears to be engaging in. She listens. She understands people." Ridge's temper flared when he heard that. "She does not understand you, Deacon. She is a doctor, not a miracle worker. Do you believe you have a connection simply because she listened to you? You don't know anything about her." "Maybe I don't," Deacon replied, meeting Ridge's glare steadily. "But I know what I feel." Those words, calm and certain, lit the fuse inside Ridge. He moved closer, the air between them thick with tension. "You stay away from her." Deacon's jaw tightened. Ridge's voice boomed through the room. "You don't get to tell me that." "The hell I don't. You expect me to stand by while you try to drag Taylor into your chaos? You've already ruined enough lives, Deacon." "That's not fair," Deacon responded, his voice rising now. "I am not that guy anymore." "I have changed," Ridge scoffed. "People like you don't change." Deacon clenched his fists, clearly trying to remain calm. "I realize I've made mistakes. I've hurt people. But Taylor saw something in me." Ridge's anger turned to disbelief. "Do you really believe that? Do you think Taylor represents your redemption story?" Deacon did not flinch. "Maybe she is." Ridge laughed bitterly. "You've got to be kidding me." There was a long pause. The space between them was filled with the sounds of the city outside, including distant traffic, a car horn, and a siren. Ridge's breathing was shallow and heavy, with restrained fury. Finally, Ridge spoke, his tone dangerously calm. Deacon shook his head slowly. "You're out of your mind. You do not own her, Ridge. You do not get to decide who she sees or how she feels. You've spent years pushing her away whenever Brooke snaps her fingers." Ridge's expression darkened. Maybe it's time someone else showed her that she deserves better. He took another step forward, and they were only a few feet apart. His next words were quiet but sharp like glass. "Stay away from her." 5 words. Simple, direct, and lethal. Deacon stared at him, his rage finally breaking through his control. "You cannot order me around like one of your models, Ridge. You believe your name gives you the authority to control everyone's lives? Taylor is not your possession. She is a member of my family," Ridge said with clenched teeth. "And I'll protect her from anyone who tries to use her." Deacon repeated incredulously. "Do you think that is what I am doing? You're unbelievable. You don't even consider her a person, do you? She's just a piece in your Brooke and Taylor tug-of-war." Ridge's nostrils flared. "Watch yourself." "No, you watch yourself," Deacon said sharply. "Because for all your talk about protecting her, you're the one who has hurt her the most. You've been back and forth between 2 women for decades, and now you're upset that someone recognizes Taylor for who she is." Ridge's fists clenched. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," Deacon said calmly. "You are jealous. Not because you love her, but because you don't want to lose control." The accusation hit Ridge harder than he anticipated. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For a moment, silence reigned again. Ridge turned away, his jaw clenched and his eyes blazed. Deacon sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, Ridge, I did not come here to fight. I understand that you are angry, but I will not apologize for caring about Taylor. She's been through hell, and she deserves someone who prioritizes her." Ridge turned around. "Do you think that's you? The guy who spent years manipulating others, lying, and exploiting women to advance?